Hello and welcome to the Tonearm, where we connect you with the people and ideas moving culture forward. I'm your host, Lawrence Purrier. We're putting the Tonearm's needle this week on Stephen Vitiello. Stephen is an electronic musician and media artist. His sound installations are in the permanent collections of MoMA, the Whitney, and the Museum of Contemporary Art in Lyon. He's worked with Pauline Oliveros, Ryuichi Sakamoto, and Joan Jonas. By day, he teaches Kinetic Imaging at Virginia Commonwealth University. Stephen's latest project is Trinity, a collaborative album with Lawrence English, who you heard from on last week's show. Each of Trinity's 5 tracks brings in a different third musician: Brendan Canty from Fugazi, Chris Abrams from The Necks, Marina Rosenfeld, Aki Onda, and the late Steve Roden. The album came out last November. Stephen shares how this project came together, what it's like to work with each of these artists, and how he's built a career turning everyday sounds into sonic experiences. Here's Stephen Vitiello. I have a lot I wanted to speak with you about, but I would love to begin by asking you a few questions about Trinity, the latest project with Lawrence English.
Sure.
I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about the decision this time around to add a third collaborator to each of the tracks and that construct and how it came to be.
I believe the credit goes to Lawrence on that one, but there's always that kind of trading back and forth of ideas and the build-up of, we've done 2 albums in the past, usually spread out 5 years or so at a time, but we had discussion to do something again and how to do it differently, how to keep it fresh. And Lawrence and I are both very active sound artists, composers, and very much constantly collaborating with people. And in some ways, for me, I grew up in New York, but moved to Virginia now, it's crazy, but 21 years ago. And a lot of the way I stay engaged with the scene is through collaboration and long distance collaboration, just because many of the people that I want to work with are elsewhere. And even as a kind of just way of staying in touch, even socially. So as we talked about different projects we were doing, I was working at that point with Brendan Canty on something that was leading up to an album and had done a couple projects with him. Lawrence and I were both very close to Steve Roden, who passed away, but we're both very engaged in his legacy. I had come across some unreleased material and thought maybe one of those pieces with Steve's wife's permission could be considered. And in some back and forth, Lawrence said, "How about Chris from The Necks?" And I got very excited because I'm such a fan. Marina Rosenfeld is somebody we both know. Aki Onda, I know a little, but mostly is a closer colleague friend of Lawrence's. And so it just builds from these kind of discussions and people we admire. I once interviewed Ryuichi Sakamoto, who gave very spare answers. But when I asked him, how do you choose who you collaborate with? He said, I think this is very close to what he said was, I choose people who can do what I cannot do and who do it well. Mm-hmm. And so ideally, we're always looking for people who can bring new light rather than just, hopefully none of us really replicate each other, but our skill sets are very varied. And with the 5 people we ended up with, they're incredibly talented, have a lot to offer. And Steve, it was sort of, after passing away, but again, it still felt like we were right there with him.
Yeah. That's a really illuminating quote and point of view that you share about that aspect of adding the skill set or bringing something to the table that's not duplicative necessarily. It helps me understand the collaborations a little more because there were a few I had pulled out I wanted to ask you about, and it's so much more clear to me now. And I was going to ask you about Brendan's contribution because the drum work and just that piece it really stood out to me on my first listen through the record.
Yeah.
I wonder, at the risk of sort of deconstructing process and getting too under the hood, could you tell me a little bit about that piece in particular? And how does, especially when you're working remotely, like, are you providing something for Brendan to respond to? Is he providing something to you? Can you take me through that?
Yeah, and that one was a little different because I was in the studio with him, and we've done an EP, an extended piece, and then now an album together. And in every case, I go to him with tracks and that are roughly in progress and say, I always have more than we have time for, because I'll book a studio near him outside of Washington, D.C., and pay for the day of studio, the engineer, and I'll play him things and see, and he'll kind of go, maybe, or definitely that one. And so when we were working on the album, I said, I have this other track with this sound artist, musician, Lawrence English. Would you think about playing on it? And he said, let me hear it. And he said, great. And just started, I don't, especially with someone like him, I rarely give input because what I'm going to get back is so fantastic. And I'm not someone who's going to dictate and say, oh no, I want, I don't know, make it all tribal or make it no symbols. I mean, it's just, I trust what comes to him, or he might give me 3 options and say, what do you like best? And then we have a discussion. But anyway, we were in the studio working on what became the album called Second. And I played him this other piece with Lawrence, and he was into it. And he's such a kind of thunderous drummer. I mean, it really is, to be in the room with him is almost overwhelming because there's so much energy and so much volume. I walked away happy. Lawrence took some liberties, I'll say, in mixing, in treating the drums very differently than we had treated them in other tracks. But he sent it to Brendan and said, is this okay with you? And Brendan was happy. And I think because what Lawrence and I did is so texture-based, there was needing to find a place and a way for the drums to work. Whereas in my other projects with Brendan, it's really clear drums are very sharp. But here we're kind of warming the edges.
As it relates to Marina Rosenfeld, is what she brings to the table simply the fact that she's a turntablist, or is it something more profound than that about her approach, her musicality? Like, what is the thing that she has that you didn't?
Yeah, I mean, she's a great listener. She's got a real composer's and improviser's mind. I actually wasn't part of the discussion with her this time. It was all Lawrence, but I remember years ago asking her to play on something or maybe play with me, thinking she would just bring records of various types and create samples. And at least in that time, she said that she didn't do that. It wasn't like she was just going to pull out a Glenn Gould piano and a, so-and-so drum beats. It was like she would create unique material for that project of one's own, whether it was my sounds or her sounds. I don't actually know what the source was for the records there, but it just was a different listener, the way that the texture of vinyl, that she kind of brings out that magic. Just, I think, it was Lawrence's suggestion and my agreement because I knew she would bring something cool. And that was one too, where Lawrence and I build sort of a series of textures. And then there's this thought that the person will come in and play on top of it. But we realized, and when she heard the mix, that we hadn't created enough space for her. And she wanted some changes in the mix, which was really valid to make room for her, really, and sonic room for her, compositional room. My friend Robin, who's also called Scanner, and I made an album that's yet to be released. And we shared it with Colin Newman from Wire, and asked Colin to play guitar. But on the tracks was like 6 layers of guitar that I had done on every piece. And there was he just heard no space for himself. So he ended up adding some synthesizers. Looking back, I wish I'd eliminated 4 of my guitar tracks from what we shared with him. So, because if you're going to ask someone to contribute, you need to make sure they have room to speak.
I love having conversations around the nature and the actual manifestations of different forms of collaboration. It's an endlessly interesting well to plumb. what I hear you describing is a very thorough type of collaboration. I often talk with artists, especially in the instrumental or composer space, where they take elements or people make contributions, and oftentimes the contributor doesn't even hear what they've done until the work comes out. Yet it sounds like you're really involving your collaborators into the point of like the mix decisions and the treatments and the post-production.
Mhm.
Can you tell me about why is that important?
It's so important. And it's something that in every project I do that involves collaboration. For one thing, collaboration has to be defined at the beginning so that you don't lose friends, so that you can keep relationships and people feel satisfied that their input was valued and heard. And, there's times where I make a project and I ask someone to contribute, but I make it clear I'm going to be making a lot of final decisions. There's other times it's the other way around. I create sound for, or music for a filmmaker. And I know that the kind of ego is, it's a film. They're going to make final decisions. But it should always be clear from the beginning. And in something like this, we're not reaching out to session musicians. We're reaching out to musicians with really distinct. We're going to them because of their sound and their ability to listen. And in order to respect that, we just need to make sure that they feel like they have space to contribute and that we're not going to manipulate them beyond recognition. We're not going to make choices with their material that they contributed that doesn't speak to what they would want to speak. There's a lot more to it, but I think it's mainly respect and to treat them the way we would hope to be treated.
So, given all of that, how do you deal with the responsibility of handling something like Steve Roden's contribution when he's not there to have that conversation? How do you keep yourself sort of, I guess, honest would be the way to say it, but,
Yeah.
consistent with what you just told me?
Yeah, very carefully. I mean, the first thing was to check with Sadi, Steve's widow, and say, is this okay? And I've been working really closely with her for the last 3 years on Steve's archive. And we run into a lot of ethical decisions that we have to discuss all the time. And sometimes someone wants something from her and she says, I don't know. And I'm like, yeah, I wouldn't do it. Other times, yes, but within these parameters. And Lawrence is also working to release a lot of Steve's work. So we're very conscious of him not being in the room. I spent over about 15 years, 20 years, Steve and I also did collaborate together. I watched how he worked and listened to how he worked. He experienced my process. We adapted to each other. So I guess I would just say I had the sensitivity and awareness of the loss of his life. He had Alzheimer's before he passed away. And so even the kind of discussions I was having with him as he was ailing had to be very careful and not to ask for something that he might have said no to. But so, yeah, I feel like I'm stumbling a little bit to say that we found a track that we thought had space and with permission of his family treated it with respect, but also because it was going to be a piece of music, played with it in the way that I kind of imagined playing with him. Remember, he and I did these gigs in France together, and we're both using modular synthesizers, but neither of us really knew, it was really early, how to use them that well.
Yeah.
But we had this kind of friendship that he would be like whispering to me, I forgot to bring an oscillator. And I'd be like, well, just patch into my case. And, we'd have our hands over each other, or he'd be getting mad because he thought I was feeding back. And I'd be like, Steve, it's you. You're the one feeding. So I felt like I could make decisions that I wouldn't have made if somebody I knew less was the person in point.
Yeah. There's a real ethical and moral overlay of what you're talking about here. This is not just about aesthetics.
No, not at all. No. And I used to ask him to collaborate fairly often, and sometimes he said no, sometimes he said yes. He was very open when he was either interested in an idea or just felt like he needed to put time somewhere else. But so in some ways I had to imagine what if he would have said no, but we weren't changing his material except to add to it. Like I wouldn't slow his track down and mute it or mutate it into something that he wouldn't recognize. I guess that was also part of it.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about in two different anecdotes this idea of, I'll be inarticulate and awkward, of potential rejection from your collaborator. You know, you mentioned how you present lots of ideas to Brendan, and he can say no sometimes.
Yeah.
And even observing you tell the story visually, which our listeners won't hear, I didn't sense body language of like defensiveness or hurt.
No, this is genuine. I feel so lucky. Like when I'm in the room with Brendan, we've come to be kind of bandmates, but man, there's also part of me that just is like, I'm not worthy in a Wayne's World way. And remembering going to see Fugazi and thinking that's the best rhythm section I've ever imagined, and then here I am playing with him. So I'm just happy if he finds something that he connects to. And, he also looks back to me for input.
It's interesting that I have to remind myself, because it was buried in my notes, that lineage is part of your background. And it's not obviously top of mind for the types of work we're discussing today. But how does one evolve from that scene to what you do now? What's that like?
It's a long one. And Steve and I once did this discussion in Bomb magazine because we both came out of punk rock, both born the same year, both came to it in the late 70s, early 80s, and then eventually into visual arts and sound arts. For me, it's a long path of having played in bands when I was a teenager, mostly because that was a thing to do, but not necessarily being very good at like straight up traditional guitar, but through discovery of avant-garde cinema and video, performance art, dance, starting to see other ways of expressing oneself, even with the same material. And through collaboration, for me in particular, absorbing so much about how different people create their work and step by step finding my own voice. And in the late 90s, I was mostly known as doing soundtracks for video art and performance, and some curators in France who were doing a museum exhibition said, we're thinking to do a retrospective of your soundtracks, unless you do installations. And I was like, oh, I do installations. But I hadn't. But I was ready. And I had done sound for enough installations that I felt I could now see what I had to offer uniquely and potentially step outside of just that part of a kind of collaborative relationship. I know for Steve, lowercase also came out of a rejection of noise, but also a kind of brashness of the art world in the 80s. And the bigger, the bolder, the more expensive it got, the quieter he felt like he wanted to go, and to pull people in rather than blast them with the bigness of it all.
Are you able to identify the common strand, if there is one? Like, what would you call the punk element of what you do now? Is there a punk element to what you do now?
There is a DIY nature. I'm not in any way properly trained. I feel like I can trust my intuition more than any kind of skill set. And I think that comes from punk rock of playing guitar traditionally didn't work for me. And then somebody played me Fred Frith's guitar solos CD at the time. And, oh, wow, I had no idea that you could do this with that same instrument. And it was, you have to ideally be skilled to make anything worthy or interesting, but it didn't have to be the same skills that 99% of the people who pick up a guitar and think, well, you should be able to play these runs really fast, or Jimi Hendrix, Jimmy Page, or bust, and that you can be, Fred Frith can be so expressive, or, others too, or Cage prepared piano, that there's other ways to play with tradition, and kind of bust open traditions.
Yeah, I feel as a listener and as a student, if I can say it that way, I feel very lucky to have been exposed to me, the postgraduate studies in music was the no wave movement for me. Just that manifestation, or that strand of the punk element moving into colliding with the art world, and the DIY, as well as the lack of boundary recognition. That's sort of profound in my musical development. And I hear that a lot in what you're saying here.
Yeah. I was briefly in a band with Ikue Mori, drummer of DNA, and it was just at the end when she was still playing folk hit. The freedom, that band is so unique and so incredibly skilled, but without any of the classic kind of skills at all. Taking self-taught so far, but she has a sound that, now even just with electronics, that is so distinctly her. It's a very long time. Yeah.
Tell me a little bit, if you don't mind. I need the 101 introduction to kinetic imaging. I want to understand, as simply as possible, I suppose, that you can explain to a layperson, not only what it is, but what your academic involvement with that discipline, how does that inform or manifest in your work?
So kinetic imaging, at least our department here at Virginia Commonwealth University, it's a media arts department. For undergraduates, it's video animation, which is 2D and 3D, sound art, sound design, coding, and other emerging media. At the undergrad level, animation is kind of supreme for our undergrads, and we really treat it from a fine arts point of view rather than character animation, rather than a mainstream Pixar kind of style. And at the grad level, it's a studio-based program in which technology is kind of a constant, but our grads also come in as sound artists and leave as video artists, or come in as animators and leave as sound artists. They make installations, performances. Before moving to Richmond for a faculty position, I worked at the Kitchen as a media art archivist. I worked for the artist named June Paik. I worked at Electronic Arts Intermix, a video art distributor, and I didn't imagine myself in academia, but a couple curators pushed me in the direction, mostly for financial survival. And when I got hired here in a tenure track position, thought, wow, I don't know if I can do it, but if I can, I'll stay. And if I can't, I guess I'll, and it clicked. And eventually now I've been chair for 8 years. And it surprises me when I go around the country or go to other schools or meet people at conferences, how it seems to me what we do is so contemporary. I see it reflected in any film festival, any Whitney biennial, but a lot of schools are not where we have been for at least the last 15 years. And we tried to change the name to Kinetic Imaging and Sound Art, and the accrediting agency said they wouldn't let us change it, which was maddening because we treat sound equally. And the first chair of the department, when it was founded, was a video artist. The second was an animator. And now the third is me as a sound artist. And everybody who knows our department says part of what stands out is sound, even whether it's sound on its own, whether it's the animation pieces have great soundtracks or the video works. And all of the disciplines that we're working with I think, inform each other. So anytime a student says to me, but I don't want to do X, it will make you better at the other. I was working for Namjoon. It was loosely. I wasn't a studio assistant. I was just someone in his orbit. He called me one night and said, Fluxus and Korean Dance Festival starting tomorrow, and you should videotape every night for a month at Anthology Film Archives. And I was like, Namjoon, I'm not a video artist. I make sound and music. He said, oh, this will make you better.
Yeah.
And he was right. And exposure to Fluxus made me a better musician. Editing and shooting video made me better composer or working with time. So I try to convey a version of that to my students too.
Yeah. There's something very personally resonant in that for me. My oldest son is in art school in San Francisco.
Nice.
And he was studying animation, and he just recently changed his major because he found the animation program too focused on some of the things that you said your program is not focused on. Like he basically, to badly paraphrase him, he said, I don't want to learn the types of animation I'm learning. Like I know how to draw my character. That's not, it was very much too commercial, I think.
Yeah, and it's a tension, if I'm totally honest, between us and the students, because they want that commercial skill set. And we're not naysaying it, but we're just trying to say animation can be so much more. And if you look at people, that you admire, a lot of them came from a much broader set of references. Yes, you could just do 3D animation and learn to do this thing that goes like this, from here to here, or has these colors, but you're going to be a much higher demand if you really understand all that the medium can be. And also the conversations that the medium are going to be in, that if you're a game, if you're creating video games, you should be able to, whether you create your own sound or just speak to a sound designer, a composer, you should understand what the medium is. You should know where these fields have come from so that you can take them where they want to go or where you want them to go.
The Tonearm will be right back after this break.
After listening to this episode, head to thetonearm.com, our online journal covering unexpected music and culture. This week on The Tonearm, you'll find new profiles on songwriter and Jeff Tweedy collaborator Liam Kazar, acclaimed experimental cellist Christopher Hoffman, introspective Canadian pianist Noah Franch Nolan, archivist Zev Feldman on Roshan Roland Kirk, and so much more. And while you're there, be sure to subscribe to our email newsletter, Talk of the Tonearm. That's thetonearm.com. The Tonearm, putting a needle on the cultural wax.
And now, back to the Tonearm. I love to talk with artists who are also in an academic or teaching environments, because I love to learn about how their interaction with students and being able to maybe experience their field through the students' sort of beginner mind, how that helps inform their own work and practice. And I wonder if I could lay that proposition on you as well, if you have any thoughts on that.
There's an interview question when you go up for a teaching job, and people want you to say, teaching will absolutely inspire me, and I make good new work because I'm exposed to my students. And it's kind of true, but it's also teaching it's very draining, and it's going into the minds of the students sometimes first and foremost. But I do feel, I feel lucky to have the job I have, to have the students I have. And there's times I get inspired. There's times I get drained. There's times when I'm teaching a grad seminar on Fluxus or history of sound art or video art, where I feel actually fortunate to be able to say I have nothing to do on Friday but spend the day watching, listening, reading. And I know that there is a benefit to that. I know sometimes it's a John Cage text that I've read 50 times, but I'm going back to it is valuable. And sometimes I think also what I like, our department is our own department, but we offer classes that often are open to students and other. So if I have a sculpture grad or if I have someone in a theory-based program, they do bring something to it where I have to say, wow, I never thought about it from that perspective. Took me a while to get there, but yeah, I do think that's valid.
Yeah. Sculpture is something that comes up a lot when I talk with with sound artists. It's
Yeah.
either as metaphor or literally as how they think about what they're doing.
Yeah. And I haven't had as many opportunities for installations recently, but a lot of the work that I feel most proud of is site specific, multi channel, sculptural kind of conversations with spaces, often unusual spaces, and the connections to sculpture are certainly there, whether it's physical material or the sound as material that can reshape the space, for example.
Have you, I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to this. Have you played much with the immersive audio formats in terms of your recorded output?
I have, yeah, in installation form, absolutely.
Yeah.
Many projects. I haven't used, I mean, I went to this theatrical release of the final Stranger Things episodes the other day, and that's so Dolby Atmos is the newest form, and I haven't worked with Atmos, but ambisonic 5.1, 7.1, binaural, many spatial, but I just haven't done I haven't done anything in Atmos, but every time it's different, and it really is about what the space is that I'm engaging with, what the content is, but it's a big part of one part of what I've done.
There was a quote from you that I wanted to ask you about, and it said that you're interested in the porous boundaries between a given sound and its distance from the source. The porous boundaries between a given sound and its distance from the source.
Yeah.
What is that? So that it implies to me there's a zone.
I know.
Tell me about that.
God, I'm trying to remember where I would have said it, and I almost feel like it was an editor making me sound smarter.
Well, you have to own it now.
Yeah, I will. I mean, the one thing that occurs to me is that when you listen to really hear sound in space is not just to hear the thing, but where it's coming from. There's these great listening exercises by the writer, composer, teacher R. Murray Schafer, and in one he has someone sit and listen and just make note of everything they've heard, and another, as you build, there's ones where he says, draw where you heard that sound, and I feel like I mean, I have headphones on, but I'm aware of a plane going by on my left side, kind of moving. And it's not just an airplane sound, but it's a sound filtered through the city, filtered from distance through time, space, material. Outside my window is a low brick building, higher brick building, and sound is bouncing off of all those surfaces coming through thick glass windows to me. So it's not just like I hear a plane, but I hear a plane as processed by the city. I'm probably most well known for the residency in the World Trade Center and the recordings I did through the windows of the building from the height of the 91st floor. Yeah, that was definitely when my ears started to really change and my thoughts started to change about not just what I was hearing, but each element of it and all the pieces together, the building moving, becoming like a breathing body that was also hearing that plane or that boat or those people down on the ground or church bells or whatever it was, that it's not just a blue is blue. It's like blue through all of these filters.
What was the sort of conceptual framework or spark for that project? What was the artist attempting there?
It was a residency. I was part of this residency program organized by Lower Manhattan Cultural Council. And the idea was that the artists accepted into the residency would have about 6 months free studio space in the World Trade Center, but that it should be people who would take the location to heart. And at the end of the residency, make work that could be experienced there, but, I think ideally would take advantage of why through this experience of this residency. And in some ways, I was kind of copying. I had just read about a project by Maryanne Amacher from 2 decades past, I guess. But it was an article in The Wire that I think Jim O'Rourke maybe did an interview with her. But it was talking about where she had sounds of the New England fisheries always being brought in by wire, by phone lines into her studio so she could bring up her faders and have the fisheries as a sonic element to pull from at any given time. So my thought was I'll be working on these music pieces, but I'd like to be able to bring in the sound of the city at any given moment. And that idea of just the sound of the city now feels kind of, and I learned was sort of naive because it wasn't just, it was always different. It was filtered by the building. It was a building with a really unusual physical structure, but also culture of how people came in, came out, who was there.
Yeah.
We as artists were this other funny population. And what I found was that as I tried to integrate it into some of the, like a dance score and some other things I was working on, that the sound itself was the most interesting thing. And so the more that I heard outside and through the building, the less I thought I should actually treat it. And I shouldn't add guitars or voices, that the sound itself was giving me more than anything else, and that I shouldn't step on it. And I mean, ever since then, I've felt every time I do field recording, I have to question what is the content and how to best respect it.
Oh, wow.
And is it just a, sort of like our discussion about collaboration, like where does it fit? What is its role? And is it speaking enough, or do I feel licensed to change it? And with the World Trade Center recordings, I really felt like there was nothing I could add to it that wouldn't detract from the best of what I had. And a sculptor, Beverly Simms, came to my studio before the open studios. And I said, I'm not a real artist. I have the sound, but I don't know how to make installations, and I'm going to put up pictures and lights. And she's just, no, don't do that. You have something very pure and distinct in the microphones and the windows, the sound, and the experience that's different than one would have without your intervention. That's enough. It really helped me from kind of muddying the waters, I would say.
Wow. Have you been back to the site?
Yeah, I've been back. I've never been up into the new tower. When 9/11 happened, my wife and baby daughter at the time were living on Canal on the West Side Highway, so we were very close, and we experienced the day, the cleanup, the emergency workers coming in and out.
Yeah.
But the work I made was so much of it was late fall 1999. It wasn't 9/11. It's changed because of what happened historically, but it's not. I feel like I can feel connection, but I also know that one is not the other. And it's interesting to go down to where the memorial is now, and I definitely feel a lot. But it's so crowded and such a tourist, like it's so full of so many other people's perspectives and emotions that I probably have never stayed long. Not to discredit what they feel. It's just, I just kind of move on, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's really interesting to me in that, you talk about the characteristics of the previous buildings and just, all the elements that go into making the sound. And
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions that emerge from that. One is to go back to what you were saying at the beginning of that discourse, which was, what was your naive sense of what the city sound was supposed to be? Was it just the din of humanity, or?
I think it's just that it's going to be as if it's one thing.
Right.
A very important arts patron in Australia once said he was going to send me into the outback to capture the sound of Australia. There's no way to capture, especially as a visitor. Like if you're lucky, you capture a moment, and a resonant moment. If you come back with an experience that you can share, that's also a gift. But these things are so complex. And the first sound I ever got through the contact mics in the World Trade Center were church bells. And as far as I remember, I never heard those sounds again. And I wasn't recording, but it influenced a later project I did. But anything that I ever heard there was different than any other thing I ever heard there. And depending on environmental conditions, it just could be so vastly different minute to minute, day to day, based on seasons, winds, real-time events in the city and the harbor. It's just so full of life and variables that there's no one thing.
You seem to treat all of your inputs as collaborators.
Mm.
You know, you speak respectfully about the environment, the architecture, the landscape, the sounds, the people. It's all collaborative.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it has it as there's always an aspect of response, which comes into collaborating with other musicians, whether it's improvising or so-called composing site-specific installations. I mean, no one's ever said to me, we have this strange tunnel. What do you want to do for it, without me being able to go to that strange tunnel, feeling something, hearing something in my head and going, now I have a way to speak with it. I don't think that that's so different than being on stage with Pauline Oliveros and being in a moment and knowing that whatever decisions we're making are based on being together and based on that day, that time. I could go back to that tunnel 6 months earlier if I could jump back in time, and my ideas might be totally different. But just what I felt, what I experienced in that instance of a site visit or an onstage improvisational collaboration is unique if you're really paying attention.
As I was preparing for our time together, I was looking through a bunch of basically artist CV material and discographical material about you.
Mm.
There's a real prolific nature to your output.
Yeah.
I'm curious, do you work on multiple projects in parallel, or do you have to be a linear thinker? And I see you nodding your head.
Yeah.
How do you manage those multiple work streams?
I just do. And I mean, even being a department chair in a university, most of my colleagues stopped making work, and I absolutely would never allow myself to do that. But it is a kind of multitasking, and part of it, because it's of the collaborative nature, there's a sending something out, waiting for something to come back, or making something together, but one person or the other is doing a mix and waiting for it to play it for the other or hear it from the other. I've just learned to be very economic with the time that I've got, and to be really as focused as I can possibly be with whatever that one thing is. So I can be working on 5 projects, but when I'm in the 2 hours that I have on a Sunday to work on this music for a dance piece, that's where everything is. Then I step back and I go, oh, but I've got that compilation track with Taylor Dupree to work on, or whatever it is. And then it's just a zooming in, zooming out. And some of the artists I've admired most, I've just watched their kind of focus. And I think that's one of the things that allows me to be good, so-called good, and or at least to please myself, is when I've really given every bit of energy I had to a moment with whatever that project is. And then you put it aside, you come back to it. If it's really not working, decide whether you trash it or sometimes come back a month later or 2 months later. But focus is the biggest thing.
What types of projects appeal to you? Like, what are you looking for next? Is there a mountain to climb? Is there an ambition?
I mean, there's always a rise and fall. And if I want to be doing something, some other thing comes up. So about 15, almost 20 years, installations were very front and center. And those opportunities really diminished after with the pandemic in particular. I would love for some of that to come back, but
Yeah.
a lot of the curators and galleries I worked with have moved on. I had 3 albums come out between, which is, crazy, but between June and the end of the year, with all people that I love. With Brendan and Han, we have gigs coming up. We've never played. We had 2 days of rehearsal at Brendan's basement a couple weeks ago. And we've got a gig in New York next week, and then in Barcelona in February. When my wife heard the album, and she doesn't listen to a lot of what I do, and doesn't even always like what I do, but she said, wow, that sounds like the band that you always dreamed of. And at that moment, I was like, but I don't know if we're a band, if it was just a project. But suddenly having gigs, it feels like it could be a band. And I would so love for that to continue. Beyond that, yeah, installations coming back. I've been working really carefully and closely with Steve Roden's archive and preservation and documentation. All of that is enough to sustain me for a while.
I don't know if it's necessarily advice, but I'm curious about the practice of maintaining your ears as listening devices, as tools. They're precious and they're integral to what you do.
Yeah.
Have you had to develop practice around both listening, but the physical upkeep of your ears?
Very separate from what I do is in my like sound art world. I've been playing fretless banjo and playing a fretless instrument. I really, really have to work to capture pitches. You know, moving your finger barely perceptibly is a big difference. And so I will say that that's been helping me. I find myself singing, and I've never, ever, I'm a terrible singer. But when I sing at home while I'm washing the dishes, my pitches are way more correct than they ever were. And I think it's because of the fretless. I don't know. There's no training other than consciously turning it on when I'm in it's not like it's like asking a photographer, are you always ready to take a picture? And I'm not always ready to do a field recording, but when I am ready because of a place, because of equipment, because of opportunity, I just go fully immersed into it and pay as much attention as possible in the moment of listening and recording, and then going back and re-experiencing it. And I do think that the more I've done it because it came naturally to me, but I also think that the more I've done it, the deeper I've gotten. And I'm 61, just by the biology of our bodies, my hearing is no doubt decreasing. And when I was 15 or 16, I was hearing the Clash live at the Palladium pressed into the speakers that were blasting. I'm sure I've done damage to myself, but just really carefully staying in tune with whatever I've got and the best at what I've got. Yeah. It's always for the better.
At the risk of speaking for you, I'm going to say that might have been a pretty decent trade-off, though. Clash at the Palladium pressed into the speakers. I'll lose a few months of high end for that.
Oh my God. Yeah. 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 It was pretty remarkable memory. And a lot of others. Now being in the studio with Brendan, he is a loud drummer that I want to take in every moment because I know how lucky I am.
Thank you so much, Stephen Vitiello. And thank you for tuning into the Tonearm. If you enjoyed this conversation, I bet you'll like at least one more of the nearly 300 episodes available in our free archive at thetonearm.com. While you're there, join our mailing list or consider becoming a paid supporter. We can't do this without you. The Tonearm is executive produced and hosted by me, Lawrence Purrier. We're produced and marketed by Michael Donaldson. Editing and sound design is by Terry Grant. And our theme music is by Birdy, spelled B-U-R-D-Y. Thanks so much for listening. Be safe and stay in touch.